Simon Reinhard is one of the most successful memory athletes ever. For those of you who aren't familiar with memory sports, and I certainly wasn't before learning and getting to know Simon, memory athletes remember huge amounts of information. Simon is a two-time world champion, holds multiple world records and Guinness World Records, and has won over 30 tournaments around the world, which is more than anybody else in his sport. At one point, Simon held 7 world records at one time, one of which was memorizing a deck of 52 cards in 21.9 seconds. Simon was also featured in the print edition of the 2014 and 2015 Guinness Book of World Records for a number of feats, including memorizing a deck of cards faster than anybody else and memorizing 300 random words in just 15 minutes. After winning the recent African European Open, Simon has clinched the world #1 ranking. Simon has created several memory courses, and he coaches a diverse set of clients, including CEOs, chess grandmasters, a physics professor, and entrepreneurs on how to improve their memory. He is also one of the founders of the International Association of Memory, also known as IAM. It is truly an honor to have Simon on the show. He's joining us today from Munich, Germany, and I hope we'll all have better memories by the time we're done here today. Welcome, Simon, and thanks for joining us on Life Excellence.
Thank you very much, Brian, and it's an absolute honor and pleasure for me to be here.
Well, and it's a pleasure to have you. Simon, as I was preparing for the show, I thought it would be great if we could not only discuss your background and memory skills, but actually have you demonstrate for our audience how amazing your memory is. And what better way to do that than to present a few disciplines that you compete in during your tournaments. Now, I realize I'm putting you on the spot, and in total transparency, I did mention this just only a couple minutes ago before we started the show. So I realize that we haven't talked a lot about doing this, but is that something we can weave into our show today?
I would be absolutely happy to do this. Let's do this.
It'll be so much fun. And let's just kick it off. So I have 3 different small memory challenges, and we'll start off with numbers. Mm-hmm. And Simon, I generated, and I actually did this yesterday in preparation for the show today. I generated, using a random number generator, 24 single digits between 1 and 9. And when I show you the list, and you haven't seen these numbers before, right?
Yep.
So when I show you, and when I show you the list, just so you know, before I hold it up, they're grouped in 6 groups of 4 digits.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Now I'm guessing this will be fairly easy for you. So I'll show you the numbers, and I'll give you plenty of time to memorize them, and then we'll see how you do. Sound good?
Yeah, sound really good. Looking forward to it.
And this is going to be especially interesting. So we have our podcast, and that's audio. And we also have folks listening to the show at youtube.com/BrianBartes. And for those of you who are watching the show, you'll get to see the numbers too. And feel free to play along to test your memory skills. Okay, are you ready, Simon?
Yes, I'm ready.
All right, here are the numbers. Can you see those okay?
Yes. Okay, got it.
Okay, so you've seen the numbers, and now I've taken them away. In post-production on the YouTube show, we'll hold the numbers up while you're reciting them. But I'm curious, Simon, does it help to be able to immediately recite them back, or are the numbers so locked into your memory that we could talk for a minute and you'd still remember them?
It definitely helps to recite the numbers, because based on the techniques, I've made some images from other numbers and put them on 6 locations, and it's always good to check whether you have them and whether it has worked.
Okay, so let's see how you do on this first warm-up challenge. Sure. Go ahead and share the numbers whenever you're ready.
Sure. Okay, we'll start. It's 1, 8, 3, 2, 7, 1613053715083272212.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing. You got everyone right. I can't even believe it. I don't know how our viewers did on YouTube, but that was incredibly impressive. You got
Thank you.
everything correct. And boy, what a great way to start the show. Thanks so much for doing it. Oh, that was cool. Simon, when did you first realize that you have a gift for memorization? And what caused you to nurture that gift and eventually to start competing in tournaments?
I think that there is not a person in the world who is completely happy with how their memory is when they're learning things. I just noticed from an early age that I had a bit of a knack for memorizing names. Sometimes when I was watching TV with my parents and I was small, I knew the name of a person on TV and they could have also known it, but I said, that's that and that person. But apart from that, maybe a bit of memory for facts. But I first got into this whole memory techniques thing and into a deeper expertise when in 2005 I noticed that there is something called memory sports and that there are memory tournaments. And how I got exactly in contact was via the website of the German non-profit organization which organizes the German competitions there, and they had a training software. And I know nothing about memory techniques and about the method of loci, where you put information on locations and so on. And they described the whole thing, and I found it almost suspicious because I had never heard of this. Yeah, and I thought, okay, what is this? Memory techniques that you memorize information on locations, and if that really worked, I should have heard of it. And I was a bit stubborn, and I thought, okay, this software worked with levels. Yeah, so for level 1, you had to, I don't know, memorize something that is really manageable, like 5 digits in 5 minutes. Then for level 2, 10, and then it got more and more above the threshold of someone who should be able to do this without techniques. And I really liked it for words. And like for words, I could accept this basic technique I had read on the page, which was like, okay, you connect a list of words to wave a story. Yeah, so like the ape jumps into the tree, then he eats the peanut there and throws the peanut shell to the ground, and so on and so on. And I tried to do this, and I tried to do stories with 30 elements and 35. And with 40 elements, like level 7 or so on the software, I hit a roadblock. 40, I couldn't do in a story within 5 minutes. And it's a problem, such a long story. If you have one weak link, then you cannot get all of the words correctly, because I also had to recode it in sequence. So a bit hesitantly, I started to try those locations. Because I thought, okay, well, let's give it a try. I'm a rather competitive person, so I wanted to get to level 7, 8, 9, 10. 10 was the highest. And it worked. It was absolutely interesting. I had never done it before. And at my second try, with like 20 locations and 2 words per location, I managed those 40. And then I noticed, okay, this whole thing has really as much potential as they are stating on the page. And I used it for the other disciplines too, like for numbers, where you convert digits into images and everything else. And shortly afterwards, I went to my first memory tournament.
That's fascinating, and it's incredibly impressive. And I think for most of us, we just don't don't appreciate the power of our brain, our human ability to memorize things. I know as time goes on, we're learning so much more about the power of the human brain, and you must be with the work that you've done, at least somewhat familiar with research on cognition and brain function. Is superior memory, that skill, is that genetic, or could we all do what you've done and become memory athletes if we wanted to?
I have never met a person in my life and in the courses that I'm giving who could not memorize more by using the method of loci. I have never met a person for whom the method doesn't work. Everybody was able to learn it quickly. And it's a method that has been used since antiquity. It was a staple part of oratory schools in ancient Rome and Greece, and every politician and person of power and who wanted to speak openly had to learn it and profited from it. So it's something that has been proven to do work since hundreds and thousands of years. So nobody has to worry that you need to be some kind of special person or some kind of special talent for that. So I mean, I think everybody can take part in memory tournaments, and if you want to get better and better, of course, training is also a factor.
Have you found you've obviously gotten to know your fellow competitors, other memory experts, and again, in your travels and competitions and tournaments, have you found that those who succeed at the highest level have high IQs, or they seem to be super smart people, or do they come from all walks of life and they've just really committed time and effort and energy to improving their memory, and they've ended up doing it at a very high level?
I think what I found among all who are successful and who are really getting great results is a huge enthusiasm for the sport, and a real joy to compete, and a real joy to memorize and recall things, and also a real joy in creating associations between things, because that's, I think, the most important skill. You visualize the information, be it words or numbers or cards or whatever, and then you connect it with your storing space, with your location, and this specific connection is the most important part. And this works best if you like to associate things and create some small connections and just do some kind of logical, creative work. And I guess that's what unites all of them. Yeah.
So maybe that's a personality trait rather than high IQ or high level of intelligence, although it seems like the memory skill, even that you demonstrated earlier with just 24 numbers, was very impressive, and to me indicates a higher level of intelligence or IQ.
Yeah, I mean, I think that intelligence is also a bit of a hard to pin down subject, because I guess everybody thinks something different about it, and starting with the question of whether it can be measured by one single number. And I know that since I'm a long time, a good memory has been associated with a high intelligence, which I think is not necessarily true in a way, because, I mean, I can easily imagine someone who has a great associative capability and is able to memorize things and just has fun, and the point of intelligence, whether that it is there or not, doesn't really get into the whole equation. Yeah, and I'm stressing this point so much because what I really want to avoid is some kind of impression by people that these memory tournaments are just for people who they deem more intelligent than themselves, and this is not true. Everyone can go there and everyone can have fun, and I think my life would certainly be less exciting and less enriched by so many wonderful experiences had I not discovered the sport.
That makes sense. Simon, we're all familiar with sports competitions. You mentioned memory tournaments. We know sports competitions and even lesser known tournaments for activities like chess and poker. But I have to confess, I had no appreciation for memory sports before learning about you. Tell us about the tournaments you participate in, what the format is, and maybe a little bit about the range of disciplines that are part of your memory competitions.
Sure. I think it's you can understand the sport best, I think, as knowing that there are two main formats, and one format is a format where everybody competes for themselves, and it is very much like a mind sport decathlon, like in track and field. In that format, which was the oldest one, you have 10 different disciplines, and those 10 different disciplines comprise one competition done over 2 or 3 days. And in each of the disciplines, which can be memorizing cards, words, spoken numbers, binary, names, and similar things, you have often a short discipline and a long discipline, like 5-minute numbers and 15-minute numbers. You have always, as the last discipline, memorizing one pack of cards, 52 cards. And in each discipline, you have a so-called standard, which is a score that gives 1,000 points. And it is usually done in a linear way, so half of that score gives 500 points, which is also, I think, an idea taken directly from the track and field decathlon. And the winner of such a tournament at the end is the one with the highest total score. And those standards are also adjusted just to avoid that maybe a standard is a bit outdated and suddenly people are getting better. People are getting always better. And so when 3 people break, it's getting adjusted. I guess it's also similar. And the other format, which I myself have to say is extremely exciting, and is where 2 people compete against each other. And it's a format that is purely digital, because only in a digital setting, be it with 2 laptops in the same room or be it like online, you can realize this. It's via a page called memoryleague.com. And there, the times you have are much shorter. While in the 10-event tournament, you have memorization times from 5 minutes to 1 hour. Yeah? At the Memory League, it is more like you have 1 minute. You have 1 minute to memorize 80 digits as fast as possible, 50 words, and 30 images like photos of things or people. And the sets work like tennis. So a set goes to 4 instead of 6 at tennis, and you need a 2-point lead. And it's usually best of 3 sets in the important tournaments. So even if you lose your cards match against your opponent because they were faster, you can still win the whole set. And I feel this is exciting, and it's also very exciting to watch. It's always live streamed on Twitch with the big tournaments, and there's quite a community around the whole thing.
That's exactly what I was going to say. That sounds so exciting to watch. And I've attended tennis tournaments, and I like tennis, but I've also attended chess tournaments. And when you're watching a chess game, it's okay, and there are exciting moments. But what you're describing sounds fascinating. And again, just amazing to see right before your very eyes that kind of memorization and the strategy and the competition and just the sheer ability of someone to memorize something as you're describing in a short period of time and then recite it back to me is just amazing. Simon, one of the world records you held, and I mentioned this in your introduction, was memorizing a deck of 52 cards, and you did it in 21.9 seconds, which is astounding to me. But this leads us into another challenge that I brought today. Would it be okay if I presented a second memory challenge, one with playing cards?
Sure.
Okay, thank you. And Simon, for this test, I've laid out 15 playing cards in random order. So I just took a deck of cards, pulled out 15, lined them up, and I'll show you a picture. There are 3 rows, with each row containing 5 playing cards.
Okay.
Now, this should be a piece of cake for you, given that you've memorized a whole deck of cards in 21.9 seconds. But I'll give you, 15, 20 seconds, 30 seconds to memorize them, and just let me know. And then tell us what the cards were in the order presented. Sound good?
Yeah, sure.
And again, for our those who are watching at youtube.com/BrianBartes, you'll get to see the cards too. And while Simon is memorizing the cards, you can play along, but also click the like button and then click subscribe, because then you'll get notified as soon as new shows are released. Okay, Simon, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay, so here are the cards.
Okay, I'm ready.
Okay, Simon, so you've seen the 15 playing cards. Whenever you're ready, I won't talk for a couple minutes and risk maybe you forgetting a card or two. So whenever you're ready, please share the list of cards in the order presented.
Just going them through in my head quickly. That should be no problem. Okay. It starts with the 4 of spades, then the king of diamonds, the 6 of hearts, the 6 of spades, the 3 of hearts, the 2 of hearts, 5 of spades, the jack of diamonds, the 9 of spades, the ace of clubs, the 5 of diamonds, the 4 of clubs, the 3 of diamonds, the 7 of clubs, and the 8 of hearts.
That's amazing. How did you do that, Simon? And that was just with 15 cards. I can't imagine memorizing an entire deck of cards. Wow. That's awesome. That's so cool. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you. Thank you. It's all based on the same principle. Everything is based on that you have a way to convert the information that you have into an image, which is, of course, simple, which is, let's say, a bit more straightforward if you're having words in front of you, or if you're memorizing photographs of things, because then you basically have the image immediately in your mind. For things like numbers or for things like cards, you need to have a kind of a translation code. Yeah, you need to have some way to convert, for example, digits into letters, and then you can form words from that. Like as if the digits were some kind of foreign alphabet that you could read with letters in your own language. It's exactly the same, and that's also what I'm doing for the cards. So the values are always a letter, usually a consonant, and the suits are a vowel. So that's why I always combine 2 together, so you can imagine that each card, therefore, becomes like a syllable. Like the 7 of hearts would be an L for the 7, looks like a turned around 7. And the heart would be for the A. That's what I always translate into. And let's say if it's followed by the 2 of diamonds, you would have 2 would be an N, and diamonds would be an E. Then it would spell out the English word for lane. And I would maybe think of a lane stretching through my location. And that's how I connect the things.
That sounds confusing to me, but I'm sure when you do it over time and practice and practice and practice that you get the hang of that. What's amazing to me is that process that you described. I think it took you longer to describe the process than it did for you to memorize those 15 playing cards, which is just remarkable. Simon, what separates the very best memory athletes, so a world champion like you, for example, from other competitors who maybe don't achieve that level of memory expertise?
I think there's definitely, even though it always sounds a bit, let's say, unusual if you say this, there is definitely a bit of talent involved, but not all around. What time has shown definitely is that different athletes have different talents for different disciplines. There are those more talented, let's say, for memorizing names, and those really talented using memorizing digits and cards and so on. And I think that's one starting point. But I think it's also that you keep up your interest, that you always want to improve yourself. I think that is definitely something that I have learned from the sport, that it can be beneficial, that you always try to improve yourself, always try to get the next best, the next improvement of your own personal best. And I think almost the most important part is a joy to compete, a joy to measure yourself against others, yeah, and not to have a negative mindset. Oh God, what happens when if I lose or so? Because ultimately, losing doesn't really matter. I mean, it's nice to have a culture of winning where only wins are counting, but you're also putting too much pressure on yourself and on others if you say only a win counts. You can never fully control what like happens in a competition. It's like always somewhere where you have to rely on yourself, where you have to simply think, I did my best, I improved myself, I optimized myself as much as possible for the event of the competition. And then it's still in the end, there are always 5-10% which are out of your control, and you have to accept it, and you have to let go in a way and just see what happens in the end. And if it happens that you know all of the information, then it's great. But if it happens that you have forgotten one or two locations and it's incomplete, then that's how it is. And you could just optimize all of the gears and levers before the whole thing started. But once the whole machine is running, you are in a way in the hands of fate. And I think in a way accepting that is like also liberating, because you don't have pressure during the competition. You just see what happens. And if your opponent is better, then you're happy for him and you have enjoyed the memory fight.
That's great insight. One of the things that you mentioned was joy.
Yeah.
And it's the second time that you've mentioned it. And that's interesting to me, because I think when most of us think about memorization, so maybe in church or in school, we've had to memorize things. We've memorized Bible verses. We've had to memorize a variety of things for tests. And the word that gets attached to that, I think, for most people is probably not joy. But clearly you do enjoy it, and I can see where memory experts really, where you're jazzed by that. And I know we all have interests in things that excite us, and for you, obviously, memorization is part of that. So I can see where that really plays a big part. There's still effort, there's still hard work. There's still training, and I'm going to ask you about that. But just enjoying what you're doing, I think there's a big lesson in that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. And I also want to stress that I completely understand that people have not the best, that memory doesn't have the best reputation, or that memorizing things is not the best reputation, because what you're doing when you're memorizing things without using memory techniques is that you're basically repeating it so often that it stays in your brain. You're basically etching it into your brain, and that's never a pleasant process. And it's also quite an unnatural process. Yeah, you reading something for the 20th time, it already gets boring after the 4th time, and then you still have to read it. And the more the information that you're reading is only like a list of things with not much understanding, connecting everything, the more tiresome it gets. So I completely understand that people do not like that, because it's also something that is a pain, and that is something that takes away the joy of learning for many people in school and later on. So that is absolutely clear. And I also don't have joy in that. I don't have joy reading things 20 times. And that shows that the things that we are doing in competition are completely different. It's more like you listen to interesting stories that pop up in front of you. It's a very visual process. So it's maybe now is the right time to, as briefly as possible, talk a bit about the method of loci, in case someone doesn't know it. Yeah? So let's just imagine you wandering down a way that you know well. Yeah, like from your home to the home of a friend, or to a nice place in your city, and you have a specific point of marks along the way. Yeah, like the bus stop, or the shop where you like to buy your groceries and everything. And these are very clearly defined stops. Let's say 5 or 10. And let's just imagine that you connect an image of something to each of those locations. Like at the grocery store, maybe you see an old lady exiting it, and at the bus stop, you see a bus, but it's maybe weird because it is going slower than usual, and it's extremely crowded. And so you see this every day. Yeah. So in your daily life experience, you see that such things, and your brain automatically connects them with those locations. That's what your brain does. And that's in a way how your brain uses the method of loci every day without you even realizing it. And you can easily check this when you think of a specific location that you know well, like maybe the hotel where you went for your last vacation. And you think of a specific place there, and the chance is extremely high that a specific memory that was part of your life is popping up, and that you get it, like the specific meal, or how the weather was in one day, or a specific conversation. And it's the same for each location, for your old classroom, for the place, for maybe the room where you're working in usually. It's like usually always that the last thing that you've experienced there pops up first in your mind. And if it's in a place where you're often, then usually memories are overlapping each other. And the ones further down are not as clear, but the ones most recent, like me talking now to you, if once our interview is over, I would have a very strong connection between the table I'm sitting at and our interview when I think of the table. That's why I was talking to Brian and we had this nice conversation. And now comes the interesting point. That is what like everyone knows, yeah? That your life experience is being saved in those locations. But then, around 2,000 years ago, one really clever person had the idea, can't I use this? Because these locations are memorizing information almost automatically. What about this information that I want to memorize? About the grain prices, or about the number of soldiers, or about the roads that go along my ancient city. And then they thought, okay, what about I choose my own locations and I try to put an image of each thing there, not because I've experienced it, but because I want to memorize it. And it showed that it worked. And that's the basis of what we are doing. We are walking along locations and paths and interesting things, and they can be anywhere in the world. And we are putting images there all of the time because digits become images, cards become images. So we are telling interesting stories to ourselves, and we repeat them without etching them in our mind, but we are relying on the power of those locations. And once the recall comes, that allows us basically to memorize hundreds of digits and hundreds of words, and it's an extremely creative and pleasurable experience, and that's where the word joy comes from that I've mentioned.
I appreciate you sharing that. And loci is obviously a very popular memorization technique. It's actually the only one that I remember. I studied years ago. I think I heard somebody speak about memorization. I don't remember, but I think I heard somebody speak about memory and maybe read a book, and that was one of the techniques. Can you make that more so I understand conceptually, and I think our listeners and viewers do too. Can you explain maybe a simple, concrete application for loci?
Sure. Let's think that a person wants to hold a presentation in front of others. And it's a presentation that takes maybe 5 minutes. Still quite a long text, still more than you can usually hold comfortably in your brain. What are people doing normally? They are repeating their slides and they're repeating the whole thing. And it still leads to a feeling of almost dread. That what you have crammed into your mind just a minute before you start, you're just happy once you have said it, because then you can't forget it anymore. And you're so focused on not forgetting things that it's hard to keep eye contact and it's hard to be relaxed. And I think everybody knows this. And this is one part where the method of loci can be extremely helpful. Just imagine that for each 2 to 3 sentences, you can replace them by a single word, by a single trigger, and you put this on your first location, your second, your third. And a presentation of 5 minutes can be summarized in that way by a list of notes, by a list of single words that are like someone whispering into your ear and helping you. And usually for 5 minutes, 10 to 15 locations are completely enough. And then you're standing there and you know the subject matter. Yeah, you know it enough that the prompt of the first word, let's say the first word is tree, gets you perfectly well to talking about, I want to talk about the development of the rainforest in Brazil. And then maybe you talk for a minute or so. And then your next location tells you maybe a small building with 2 important people in front of it. And maybe you think of government or so. And then, okay, the next thing I want to talk about is how the government of Brazil has treated the rainforest, and maybe in a positive or in a negative way, and how that has changed, and so on and so on. So you're basically having, like a stage actor, always someone whispering in your head, but it's not someone real. It's the information you have in your locations. And this information, if you have connected it properly and if you have repeated that, it is much more stable than anything you can have in your short-term memory. You simply know which image is on the next location, and that makes you completely relaxed. You can only focus on the first one. You can forget the following 9 locations. You're just on the first one. You see the image for 3 there, and you're like just talking. Then you just go to the second location. You only see the small government building, and you're talking about that. You don't have to keep everything in your mind because the locations do all that work for you, and you just go from one place to the other. And of course, it's in a way not a difference between using this for a presentation. I also used this, for example, for a TEDx talk that I had a few years ago in Munich, where it was like 18 minutes of talking, and I had like 70 locations for it. It went smoothly. But it's not just for that. You can use the same thing, of course, if you're learning something, because the contents of a book and the chapters, after you have read them and you have understood them fully, can also be structured according to one word per passage or two. And exactly the same can be done. So there are, in a way, countless real-life applications, even for something like learning languages and learning grammar, because it's always about you have information, and the information is too much for you to learn without etching them into your brain, which you don't want to do, because that always shows a limitation of your short-term memory. And if that happens, it's hard to get it into your long-term memory. So once you get to that stage and you know the techniques, you know, okay, that's maybe a bit too much for me. So now I use a few locations. And that's helped me since many years.
That's terrific. And without getting into the science behind how our brain works, we just know that our brain is able to more easily memorize images, for example, or the loci example you gave, where we're all familiar with a certain space, or I've heard it described as the house in certain rooms. We all know our house and we know rooms. And if we're putting ideas or images into rooms, and then when we hear or when we see the building with the 2 government officials in front of it, then that helps us to recall the whole story behind that, everything that we're going to talk about. That's terrific. And obviously, we can learn about loci. There's lots of information out there about that particular technique. Simon, could you share at least one other technique that our listeners and viewers can use? What we like to do on Life Excellence is learn how our guests are achieving at a very high level in their chosen profession, and then glean 1 or 2 or 3 techniques and strategies that we can apply to our lives, whatever we're doing. So if you could share even one other technique that would help us with memorization, that would be very appreciated.
Sure. I think with memorization, you always have like different layers of techniques. Of course, we have already talked about the method of loci, but another technique that you can also use is simply, if it's just a few elements that you want to memorize quickly, is just connect them into a short story. If you have 3 or 4 elements, then you can just create some kind of interaction between the things. Maybe you have you want to memorize a bottle and a book, and then maybe in a couch, then you place the bottle in your small story on the book, and you imagine yourself carrying both and laying them onto the couch, and the couch maybe staying next to a bookshelf. And then you have those 4 things, and you have a sequence in your mind. You can do this with so many things. It's just like a bit like in school when we had this task of you get 3 words and you create a story from that. And I think in a more general matter, it's like always important to create some kind of interest for the thing that you want to memorize. So, and that you are trying to find some kind of fascinating aspect of the information you want to learn before you are engaging more deeply with it. Because if you don't do that, then you can quickly get into this routine of reading it again, and you don't even want to get deeper. And you're also missing many of the interconnections, many of the deeper meanings. And I think that is connected to the next thing. And of course, it's a point you can't miss. It's understanding. So I think it's always a big misunderstanding that memorizing things with the help of memory techniques means that you are not trying to understand the information you want to memorize. I always tell the people in my courses, first try to understand what you want to memorize as deeply as possible, read it, try to understand it, make as many connections with the information you already know as you can, then you read it again. And then you are ready to put this information in a very abbreviated form on your locations, because then you have something that you can be reminded of. I think that, in a way, summarizes what everybody can use and can use quickly.
It really is like a muscle, isn't it? I mean, if we think about physical exercise and fitness, in order to increase the size of our muscle, we need to do something repeatedly over and over again and practice it. And it sounds to me, in hearing you talk, like memorization is the same way, that if you're practicing techniques and strategies and trying to, one of the thoughts that I had earlier is really making a game of it. We enjoy playing games. And so if you can turn it into a game rather than having to study or having to prepare for a speech or all those things that we have to do, if we can make it fun and joyful and turn it into a game and use some of the techniques that you're talking about, then we really can significantly improve our ability to recall information, not arbitrarily, but for some useful purpose, like delivering a talk or preparing for a test.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think that sums it up excellently. And the real motivation that comes from using those techniques is a feeling that someone extremely rarely has if they are not using them. That is, that you're getting full control over the information. The information is not slipping away anymore. It's not as elusive, and there is no chance that it's getting forgotten if you have put it properly on one of your memory locations, or if you've made your connecting story properly. And that feeling brings with it not only a feeling of, and I say the word for the third or fourth time, I think, joy, because you finally get things in such control that you can focus on other things, like on talking and on engaging with the people you are talking to, or associating freely while you're writing your exam, because you know the facts and maybe you can answer one of the difficult questions easier. But it also brings with itself a feeling of a very profound calmness, because you suddenly notice that this fear that everybody has of forgetting things and of being disrupted just for a single second, and then suddenly everything is gone. And this fear of blackouts and this fear of standing there and not knowing what you have learned just a minute ago, this is gone. And this is such a liberating experience, not only for speeches, but also for the important moments in your life, like job interviews, like the most important exam in your life, maybe, or when you are in other situations where you need to get facts on the table, where you need to talk openly, where you can't look at your notes, where people need to experience who you are, but they also want to hear what you have to say. For that, it's such an invaluable tool. And I think that is where it has most enriched my own life.
That totally makes sense. You mentioned the word liberating. I was thinking empowering, and it's really both. So it's
That's the same, yeah.
liberating in that you're free from that burden that we often think of memorization as, but it can also be really empowering when, like you said, you have that part down so that you can focus on other things. If you're giving a talk, you can make eye contact with people and you can smile, and you're liberated from the burden of having to remember what it was that you were going to talk about. But it's also an empowering feeling, because it changes the whole dynamics of giving that talk, doesn't it? And allows you to really enjoy and be in the moment, rather than sort of frantically trying to make sure that you recall everything that you need to say.
And interestingly, it even beats by a mile the feeling of having notes with you. I mean, people often, even moderators on TV, they're having their notes and they're reading it. Sometimes in quiz shows, of course, in the news, they are having their teleprompters and so on. And even that doesn't feel that empowering, because you always have an outside source of information that you're reading from. You first need to digest this information again, and you also need to hope that this is enough to get you to all the things you want to talk about. But if you have, let's say, transformed this information into your own, let's say, symbolic images, and you have put them on your own locations, everything has already been internalized. So you don't need to look at an outside source, at a note, at a teleprompter, at someone holding up a sign. It's all within you, and that's even better.
That's well said.
Yeah.
Simon, I believe you broke the world record in 2015 by memorizing 49 random words in 1 minute. Can we do one more memory challenge to demonstrate your word memory skill?
Sure.
Okay, and I promise this will be the last one.
Okay.
Now, for this test, I used a random word generator.
Mm-hmm.
They're available on the online to create 20 words.
Okay.
And I'll give you the words. I'll show them to you.
Yeah.
And our YouTube viewers will get to see the words too. Mm-hmm. The words are lined up. There are 5 rows of 4 words.
Okay.
And I'll give you, say, 30 seconds or however long you need to memorize them. Mm-hmm. And we'll see if you can recite the words in the order presented. Sound good?
Okay, great. Great, let's do that.
Okay, Simon, here are the words. Mm-hmm. And make sure you can see those okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and go ahead and start memorizing them.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so you've seen the words, and I've taken the list away. It's incredible to think that you're going to remember these, but go ahead whenever you're ready. Recite the word list in the order presented, please.
Rugby, hypnotize, housewife, rage, register, executive, leader, survival, provision, ferry, dressing, utter, exceed, decrease, loot, man, slant of priority, money, and sought.
Absolutely incredible. And for our audience, in case you didn't know it already, English is not Simon's first language, so it's even more remarkable. Some of these words, I'm not even sure I know what they mean, but that was fantastic and absolutely incredible. Simon, I mentioned earlier, and we talked a little bit, you've mentioned it a couple times, that you have a memory course, and also that and I mentioned this in your introduction, that you teach memorization techniques to folks in all walks of life. Where can our listeners and viewers go to learn more about you?
I have a website that's called schoolofmemory.com, where all of those courses are summarized. And the courses are basically for every walk of life, as you said. So I have, for example, courses for people learning for the law exam, for their medical exam, people preparing for university admission tests, people who want to memorize specific things in their jobs, like holding presentations, getting better in general at meetings where you need to juggle arguments and counter arguments. For people presenting in court, I have also courses for learning languages better with the help of memory techniques. Just imagine learning vocabulary on locations, learning grammar and everything. I have a separate section, interestingly, for chess, because during the pandemic, chess has grown worldwide, and suddenly people came to me and asked whether they can also memorize chess information with the help of memory techniques. And since I am an avid chess player, I devised a course in that regard, and people like it very much. So that, in a way, sums it up what you can see there. And you can also contact me there via the page. And I'm really happy that people are interested in those courses. And apart from taking part in tournaments and talking about memory techniques, teaching is also one of my great passions. So I really love to see people entering this whole world of memory techniques and seeing what they can do better with that and how much they can memorize.
I appreciate you sharing that information, and I really appreciate your willingness to help others to improve their memory through your techniques and the course that you offer. And of course, we'll include your website and also social media contact information in the show notes. Simon, I have one last question.
Yeah.
Our show is called Life Excellence, as you know,
Mhm.
and I wonder, you have an excellent memory, and you are a world champion memory expert. So obviously you've achieved excellence at a very high level. What does excellence mean to you?
I think excellence at its core means that you try to get the most out of your own abilities. I think that's the most satisfying way to understand excellence. I think that's much more fulfilling than measuring excellence only by way of outward success, because, as I said earlier, that's in a way also something that's often not under your own control. But what is under your own control is to work on yourself, to try to improve and better yourself, and to that way maybe, but it's different for everyone, find a way to a happier life.
That's very well said. Simon, thank you so much for being on the show today. It's been great getting to know you, learning about you, learning memory techniques, and also thanks so much for your willingness to demonstrate that through the
Sure.
memory challenges that we have. I'm still absolutely amazed by all three of those challenges, and you nailed it 100% each time. It's great to have you, and I will definitely remember this unique and amazing show. Thanks, Simon.
Thank you very much for having me here, and it was a great pleasure and a great joy being here. Thank you for all those interesting questions, and much further success with your show. It's really great.
I appreciate that. Thanks. And thanks so much for tuning into Life Excellence. Please support the show by subscribing, sharing it with others, posting about today's show with memory expert Simon Reinhard on social media, and leaving a rating and review. You can also learn more about me at BrianBartes.com. Until next time, dream big dreams and make each day your masterpiece.